Imagine for a whole decade, your world is life or death. Every stranger could be your enemy. Every mistake could be your laugh. You spend 10 years doing one thing, fighting every day, every night. Eat, sleep, fight, repeat. Then one day, it's over. You won. You get to go home. You load the ships, gather your men, 2 weeks. That's all it should take. Most people know this story. The Cyclops, the Sirens, the witch, the sea monster. What if none of them are the real story? What if this was never about a man trying to get home? This is Best Day Gone Wrong, the show where dream vacations become nightmares and the trip of a lifetime becomes a day everything falls apart. I'm your host, Jay, and tonight we're telling the real story behind the Odyssey. Let's get into it. Starting with the most obvious question first. Did any of this actually happen? Short answer? Maybe. The story's credited to a guy named Homer. We're not even sure Homer was one person. For centuries, this wasn't a book. It was spoken. Passed down storyteller to storyteller, polished a little more every single time, long before anyone wrote a word of it down. The world's longest running campfire story. The setup: Greek kingdoms spend 10 brutal years trying to take the city of Troy. Odysseus is one of their commanders. Troy falls, then the journey home. For a long time, historians figured that the whole war was just a myth. Great story, never happened. Then, in 1870s, a guy named Heinrich Schliemann starts digging into a hill in modern Turkey, and he finds a real city. Arrowheads, fire damage, bodies. Hittite Empire records from that same era even mention a war involving a place called Wilusa, which a lot of historians think is just their word for Troy. Does that prove Odysseus existed? No. Does it prove that there was a Cyclops waiting on an island? Definitely not. And honestly, I don't even think that's the most interesting question here, because for 3,000 years, people kept telling this story, not because they believed in Cyclops, because every generation saw themselves in the journey. The monsters changed, human nature didn't. So, 10 years at Troy, 10 years waking up expecting violence. Do anything long enough and it stops being something you do. It becomes who you are. War ends, Odysseus wins. He loads the ship. You'd think the first stop is rest, a breath, anything. Instead, they raid a coastal town. Nobody attacked them. Nobody threatened them. They just saw an opportunity to loot, because that's what 10 years of war trained them to do. The town fights back. Men die. And before a single monster ever shows up, the real enemy of this whole story is made clear right there. Not what's in front of him, the version of himself he spent 10 years practicing. Next island. No monster. No battle. Just fruit. Just fruit. The locals eat it all day, and a few of his men try it. The second they do, they stop wanting to go home. Nobody's holding them. Nobody's threatening them. They just found something that makes it all go quiet. Odysseus has to drag his own crew back to the ship, screaming, crying, begging to stay. Take away the magic fruit for a second. Picture surviving 10 years of war. You watched friends die. You've killed people. Your body's finally safe, but your mind never got the memo. For some people, that outlet's a drink. For others, it's a pill, a habit, a screen. Not because they're weak. The fruit was never really the danger. It's what it stands for. The pull to numb yourself instead of actually healing. Odysseus catches it in time. He drags his men back, saves them from disappearing into it. But here's the irony, and hang on to this one. It's always easier to see somebody else's escape hatch than your own. Because before this trip is over, Odysseus finds one of his own. And next time, there won't be anybody left to drag him back to the ship. Next up, they land on an island, and there's this guy, lives completely alone. No ships, no trade, no interest in anything past his own shoreline. Just his cave, his sheep, whatever he wants right now. Strangers show up. His reaction isn't curiosity. It isn't even caution. He just starts eating them. Here's the detail I want you to sit with. He's got one eye, which means he can only see what's directly in front of him. No wider picture ever. We call people like that half blind sometimes, and we're rarely talking about their eyesight. We're talking about someone who can't or won't see past their own version of things. Odysseus can't out-muscle something that size, so he gets him drunk, waits until he's out cold, and drives a spike straight through that one eye. The Cyclops screams. His neighbors run up and shout, "Who's attacking you?" He answers, "Nobody." So nobody comes. Sit with that for a second. Nobody did this to me. How often do we say some version of that to ourselves? Blame the boss, blame the economy, blame bad luck, anybody but us. And here's the twist. Odysseus gets away clean. His men are safe, the ships are sailing off, the danger's over. He could have just left it there, but he doesn't. He turns the ship around just far enough to shout his real name back at the giant. Not because he has to, because he wants the credit. And the Cyclops' father happens to be the god of the seas. So from that second on, the sea itself is coming for him. The danger was already gone. One shot of pure ego turned 2 weeks into 10 years. Sometimes the battle's already over. The only thing left that can wreck you is the need to prove that you won. One simple rule: don't touch the sacred cattle, no matter how hungry you get. By now, they've been at sea for years, exhausted, starving, grieving friends they've already buried, and they survived storms, monsters, shipwrecks, and this is the moment that it really all falls apart. While Odysseus sleeps, his men kill the cattle, not because they're evil, because they are desperate. And desperation makes tomorrow feel a lot less real than today. Easy to judge them until you've been that hungry. Odysseus saw it coming. He warned them. He pleaded with them. But here's the truth that every leader eventually runs into. You can guide people. You can warn them, love them. You can't make their choices for them. One moment of giving undoes years of discipline. The storm that follows destroys the ship. Every one of his men dies. After everything, the men who spent his whole life trying to bring everyone home is completely alone. No more monsters, no more battles, no more storms. The island doesn't look dangerous. It actually looks like paradise. A beautiful island and beautiful women. Calypso offers Odysseus everything: safety, comfort, love. She even offers him immortality. And he says yes, but not just for 7 days, 7 years. Now imagine this for a second. Imagine winning an all-expenses-paid vacation. No work, no responsibilities, and you can do what you want every single day. At first, it sounds like heaven, but after a month or a year, maybe 7 years, eventually you probably wake up asking yourself, is this it? Because enjoyment and fulfillment are not the same thing. One feels good in the moment, the other gives you a reason to get out of bed. Every version of this story describes Odysseus sitting on the shore. He's staring out at the sea, but he's crying, not because anyone is hurting him, because he's homesick. He has everything people think they want. And yet, the one thing he doesn't have is purpose. I think this is one of the most honest moments in this entire poem, because sometimes we're not trapped by pain. We're trapped actually by comfort, because comfort asks very little of us. Purpose, on the other hand, asks everything. It asks us to risk failure, to carry responsibility, to love people who might hurt us, and to build something that matters. Leaving the island didn't just mean sailing away, it meant facing his grief, his mistakes, the uncertainty of what waited for him at home. It meant choosing a meaningful life over an easy one. So he stayed 7 years. Not because he couldn't leave, because somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten why he should. And here's the detail that really stands out to me. Odysseus never decides to leave on his own. Actually, the gods have to intervene. Whether you see this as divine intervention or simply symbolism, I think Homer is really pointing out something deeply human. Sometimes we become so comfortable with the life we've settled for that we need something outside of ourselves to wake us up. A friend who tells us the truth, a mentor, a loss, a moment that reminds us we stopped living with purpose and simply started passing time. Only then does Odysseus finally build the raft. Only then does he begin the journey home. After 20 years, Odysseus finally reaches Ithaca, alone. Every man who left with him is gone. And you think, all right, that's it. He made it. Roll the credits. Except home didn't wait for him. His son's no longer a little boy. His wife spent 20 years learning to survive without him. His own house has been filled with strangers who assumed he was never coming back. Time doesn't stop moving just because your life does. But here's the part I don't think we talk about enough. Maybe home isn't the only thing that changed. The man who sailed away 20 years ago died somewhere along the journey. And war has a way of doing that. So does grief. So does violence. For 20 years, survival has been his full-time job. Trust no one. Stay alert. Expect betrayal. Solve it with force. Those habits kept him alive. But what happens when the war's finally over and the war is still living inside you? How do you become a husband again when you spent 20 years becoming a soldier? How do you become a father when your son became a man without you? How do you put down a sword when it's always been part of your hand for half your life? Maybe that's why no one recognizes him. Not because he's older, because he isn't the same man anymore. And maybe he doesn't recognize himself either. So before he can reclaim his life, he has to prove who he is. Not with words, with an old scar. A bow only he can string. Fragments of the person he used to be, still surviving underneath everything the journey turned him into. And only then is he finally allowed to come home. But I don't think home means going back to the person you were. I think home is learning to somehow become something new. Someone who can finally stop fighting. Here's the thing that made me want to tell you this one today. Back in the 90s, a psychiatrist named Jonathan Shea spent years working with combat veterans, trying to come home, not just physically, psychologically. And he kept noticing the same thing. Their stories all sounded strangely familiar, not because they fought Cyclops, but because they carried the war home with them. Tunnel vision. Always waiting for danger, the pull to numb the pain instead of facing it, the guilt of impossible calls, the struggle to find anyone again. Shea wrote a book about it, Odysseus in America, arguing that this poem captures something real about the invisible part of coming home after war. Not because Odysseus was a case study, actually because Homer understood something true about people. Sometimes surviving is the easy part. Learning how to live again is the actual fight. Maybe that's why we're still telling this story 3,000 years later. Not because we think the monsters were real, because we know they still are. Most of them just live inside us now. If something in tonight's story hit closer to home than you expected, maybe it was the habit, the tunnel vision, the need to numb the pain, or maybe it was realizing that coming home isn't always the same as feeling at home. Whether your battle came from military service, trauma, addiction, grief, or something no one else even knows you're carrying, you're not alone. Healing doesn't happen because we're strong enough to carry everything by ourselves. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is let someone else help carry it with us. In a way, the one thing Odysseus never truly learned, he kept believing he had to carry the journey by himself. Maybe the most courageous thing any of us can do is ask for help before the journey home becomes another decade long. Because making it back to shore isn't the same thing as making it home. So perhaps every island wasn't just another adventure. It was another piece of being human. Habit, ego, escape, comfort. The limits of what you can do for the people you love. The monsters, they were never the point. Maybe they were just the language Homer had for battles we're still fighting today. Most of us will never face a Cyclops, and thank God. Oh my God, that sounds really terrifying. I can't even imagine. But maybe scarier yet, all of us will face something that asks, who are you becoming? That's probably why this story has stood the test of time. Not because it teaches you how to survive a storm, because it reminds you, even after the storm ends, the hardest trip is still left, and that's the one back to yourself. This has been Best Day Gone Wrong. Subscribe to us on YouTube at Best Day Trip for shocking travel stories inspired by real events from around the globe.